Good day, good people, bad people, all people. How y'all doing today? Um, Welcome to another. Is it an episode? I don't know. Another chapter of Mad Reads. There we go. We ain't gonna call them episodes. We gonna call them chapters. Um, yeah. So, oh yeah, all this is happening as you guys are watching. So as this grows, um, and as I think of ideas, and share them with you, I'm implementing them as we go. So you guys are going to be a large part of that process. I'm very transparent in a lot of my processes um, for the simple fact that I don't got time to be editing videos because I made a mistake or a human error. I'm not here to perform for you. I'm here to read. So without further ado, we are going to pick up from where we left off with the last chapter or the last section of All About Love. So where we left off on the sentence, love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love. We choose to love. Since the choice must be made to nurture growth, this definition counters the more widely accepted assumption that we love instinctually. Everyone who has witnessed the growth process of a child from the moment of birth on sees clearly that before language is known, before the identity of caretakers is recognized, babies respond to affectionate care. Usually they respond with sounds or looks of pleasure. As they grow older, they respond to affectionate care by giving affection, cooing at the sight of a welcome caretaker. Affection is only one ingredient of love. To truly love, we must learn to mix various ingredients: care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. Honest and open communication for me is like one of the most integral. It's like a deal breaker. I don't like any performative actions in relating, whether it's in a platonic relationship, whether it's familial or romantic. I'm not, with the acting. Learning faulty definitions of love when we are quite young makes it difficult to be loving as we grow older. Whew. We start out committed to the right path, but go in the wrong direction. Most of us learn early on to think of love as a feeling. When we feel deeply drawn to someone, we connect with them. That is, we invest feelings or emotions in them. Most of us learn early on to think of love as a feeling. When we feel deeply drawn to someone, we connect with them. Connect, Cathect. Go Google that. I know I did when I first read this. It gives the definition, but I wanted to have a deeper developed understanding of what the word meant. That is, we invest feelings or emotions in them. That process of investment, wherein a loved one becomes important to us, is called cathexis. 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 In his book, Peck rightly emphasizes that most of us confuse connecting with loving. We all know how often individuals feel connected to someone through the process of connecting, insist that they love the other person, even if they are hurting or neglecting them. Since their feeling is that of cathexis, they insist that what they feel is love. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. I'm going to say that again. Love and abuse cannot coexist. Abuse and neglect are, by definition, the opposite of nurturance and care. Often we hear of a man who beats his children and wife and then goes to the corner bar and passionately proclaims how much he loves them. If you talk to the wife on a good day, she may also insist he loves her, despite his violence. An overwhelming majority of us come from dysfunctional families in which we were taught we were not okay, where we were shamed, verbally and or physically abused, and emotionally neglected, even as we're also taught to believe that we are loved. For most folks, it is just too threatening to embrace a definition of love that will no longer enable us to see love as present in our families. Too many of us too many of us need to cling to a notion of love that either makes abuse acceptable or at least makes it seem that whatever happened was not that bad. Raised in a family in which aggressive shaming and verbal humiliation coexisted with lots of affection and care, I had difficulty embracing the term dysfunctional. Since I felt and still feel attached to my parents and siblings, proud of all the positive dimensions of our family life, I did not want to describe us by using a term that implied our life together had been all negative or bad. I did not want my parents to think I was disparaging them. I was appreciative of all the good things that they had given in the family. With therapeutic help, I was able to see the term dysfunctional as a useful description and not as an absolute negative judgment. My family of origin provided, throughout my childhood, a dysfunctional setting, and it remains one. And I think that's a lot of people's upbringing. And what I think is beautiful about what's happening now with our generation is a lot of us our a lot of us are disrupting these cycles. We are getting rid of, well, not getting rid of, we're working through this trauma. We're having actual processes, not saying we're having processes and just thinking about the problems. Like we're actually processing them and it's discerning what belongs to us, what doesn't, what we need, what we don't, and making peace with the things that, we were ashamed of and things that we were even taught to be ashamed of. So shout out to y'all, for breaking these cycles of trauma. Shout out to y'all for doing the work. Shout out to y'all for putting y'all parents on. Because the youth can teach. And, the older folks, the elders, could use some youthful wisdom. So she said, my family of origin provided throughout my childhood a dysfunctional setting, and it remains one. This does not mean that it is not also a setting in which affection, delight, and care are present. On any day in my family of origin, I might have been giving caring attention, wherein my being a smart girl was affirmed and encouraged. Then, hours later, I would be told that it was precisely because I thought I was so smart that I was likely to go crazy and be put in a mental institution where no one would visit me. Not surprisingly, this odd mixture of care and unkindness did not positively nurture the growth in my spirit. Applying Peck's definition of love to my childhood experience in my household of origin, I cannot honestly describe it as loving. Pressed in therapy to describe my household of origin in terms of whether it was loving or not, I painfully admitted that I did not feel loved in our household, but that I did feel cared for. And outside my household of origin, I felt genuinely loved by individual family members, like my grandfather. This experience of genuine love, a combination of care, commitment, trust, knowledge, responsibility, and respect, nurtured my wounded spirit and enabled me to survive acts of lovelessness. I am grateful to have been raised in a family that was caring and strongly believe that had my parents been loved well by their parents, they would have given that love to their children. They gave what they had been given. Care. Remember, care is a dimension of love, but simply giving care does not mean we are loving. Like many adults who were verbally and or physically abused as children, I spent a lot of my life trying to deny the bad things that had happened, trying to cling only to the memory of good and delicious moments in which I had known care. In my case, the more successful I became, the more I wanted to cease speaking the truth about my childhood. Often, critics of self-help literature and recovery programs like to make it seem that far too many of us are more eager to embrace the belief that our families of origins were, are, or remain dysfunctional and lacking in love. But I have found that, like myself and most people, whether raised in an excessively violent or abusive home or not, shy away from embracing any negative critique of our experiences. Like many adults. That's a mouthful. Usually, it requires some therapeutic intervention, whether through literature that teaches and enlightens us or therapy, before many of us can even begin to critically examine childhood experiences and acknowledge the ways in which they have had an impact on our adult behavior. Had an impact on our adult behavior. Excuse me, I'm having a hard time with my nasal passages right now. It's lemon pepper everything season. This fucking pollen is everywhere. Most of us find it difficult to accept the definition of love that says we are never loved in a context where there is abuse. Most psychologically and or physically abused children have been taught by parenting adults that love can coexist with abuse. And in extreme cases, that abuse is an expression of love. Fuck out of here. This faulty thinking often shapes our adult perceptions of love. So that just as we would cling to the notion that those who hurt us as children loved us, we try to rationalize being hurt by other adults by insisting that they love us. This faulty thinking often shapes our adult perceptions of love. So that just as we would cling to the notion that those who hurt us as children loved us, we try to rationalize being hurt by other adults by insisting that they love us. That man or that woman or that person who put their hands on you, they don't love you. That's not love. Abuse is not love. Compassion, patience, understanding. Those are things that are connected and tied into love. But none of those things singularly mean love. It's a combination of things. And I mean, we all have our own definition of what love is and what love means to us, but we know it's more than one thing. It can't just be one thing. And it most certainly is not abuse. It most certainly is not pain. In my case, many of the negative shaming practices I was subjected to in childhood continued in my romantic adult relationships. This is most of us. Initially, I did not want to accept the definition of love that would also compel me to face the possibility that I had not known love in the relationships that were most primary to me. This is something I struggled with in the past few years, learning that a lot of the relationships I built with people that I thought I would spend the rest of my life with were more so along the lines of cathexis. It wasn't real love. And I think I've only experienced that romantically one time, if I'm being honest with myself. And that says a lot because I've been a serial lover, so to speak, in my youth, and that has a lot to do with upbringing, and that in relation to my ideas of what love is and what love looks like, and so this is stuff that I'm working through also. And like I said before, this book is not a book that you just read through one time. As I'm reading this to you all, I've read this part before, but like some of these things are hitting different, and it's like some other things hit the first time. So you come back and you have different revelations and understandings of things. That's why it's always good to revisit certain things to gain a different clarity. They say hindsight is 20/20, right? Initially, I did not want to accept a definition of love that would also compel me to face the possibility that I had not known love in the relationships that were most primary to me. Years of therapy and critical reflection enabled me to accept that there is no stigma attached to acknowledging a lack of love in one's primary relationships. And if one's goal is self-recovery, to be well in one's soul, honestly and realistically confronting lovelessness is a part of the healing process. And if one's goal is self-recovery, to be well in one's soul, and in the depths of that motherfucker, honestly and realistically, confronting lovelessness is a part of the healing process. A lack of sustained love does not mean the absence of care, affection, or pleasure. In fact, my long-term romantic relationships, like the bonds in my family, have been so full of care that it would be quite easy to overlook the ongoing emotional dysfunction. In order to change the lovelessness in my primary relationships, I had to first learn anew the meaning of love, and from there, learn how to be loving. Embracing a definition of love that was clear was the first step in the process. Like many who read The Road Less Traveled again and again, I am grateful to have been given a definition of love that helped me face the places in my life where love was lacking. I was in my mid-20s when I first learned to understand love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. That's interesting. The will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. I think that makes perfect sense because, like, love in its truest form is an embodiment of an inward and outward expression. You loving yourself thus means that you have the ability to love all, because in us is all, because we're all mirrors. So when she says, as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another spiritual growth, when you nurture your own spiritual growth, you're nurturing the spiritual growth of other people, because you are a beacon of light. People see that. You may not think that people are looking at what you're doing, or people are peeping, your growth and the things that you're going. They may not even say it. They may not acknowledge it, but you're planting seeds. And so when you nurture yourself, and you can also like actually nurture other people, but even the act of nurturing oneself is nurturing to, the mass of people who love and care for you. It still took years for me to let go of learned patterns of behavior that negated my capacity to give and receive love. One pattern that made the practice of love especially difficult was my constantly choosing to be with men who were emotionally wounded, who were not that interested in being loving. One pattern that made the practice of love especially difficult was my constantly choosing to be with men who were emotionally wounded, who were not that interested in being loving, even though they desired to be loved. I've been that man too. I wanted to know love, but I was afraid to surrender and trust another person. I was afraid to be intimate. By choosing men who were not interested in being loving, I was able to practice giving love, but always within an unfulfilling context. Naturally, my need to receive love was not met. I got what I was accustomed to getting: care and affection, usually mingled with a degree of unkindness, neglect, and on some occasions, outright cruelty. At times, I was unkind. It took me a long time to recognize that while I wanted to know love, I was afraid to be truly intimate. Many of us choose relationships of affection and care that will never become loving because they feel safer. The demands are not as intense as loving requires. The risk is not as great. Many of us choose relationships of affection and care that will never become loving because they feel safer. The demands are not as intense as loving requires. The risk is not as great. So many of us long for love, but lack the courage to take risks. Even though we are obsessed with the idea of love, the truth is that most of us live relatively decent, somewhat satisfying lives, even if we often feel that love is lacking. In these relationships, we share genuine affection and or care. For most of us, that feels like enough because it is usually a lot more than we received in our families of origin. Undoubtedly, many of us are more comfortable with the notion that love can mean anything to anybody, precisely because when we can define it with precision and clarity, it brings us face to face with our lacks, with terrible alienation. The truth is, far too many people in our culture do not know what love is. And this not knowing feels like a terrible secret, a lack that we have to cover up. Had I been given a clear definition of love earlier in my life, it would have not taken me so long to become a more loving person. And I want to get into more of the chapter. There are actually 4 more pages, so you know what? I'm going to keep reading. Had I been given a clear definition of love earlier in my life, it would not have taken me so long to become a more loving person. Had I shared with others a common understanding of what it means to love, it would have been easier to create love. It is particularly distressing that so many recent books on love continue to insist that definitions of love are unnecessary and meaningless. Or worse, the author suggests that love should mean something different to men than it does to women. that the sexes should respect and adapt to our inability to communicate since we do not share the same language, which is bullshit. This type of literature, and is also why I don't believe in gender roles. This type of literature is popular because it does not demand a change in fixed ways of thinking about gender roles, culture, or love. Rather than sharing strategies that will help us become more loving, it actually encourages everyone to adapt to circumstances where love is lacking. Women, more so than men, rush out to purchase this literature. We do so because collectively we are concerned about lovelessness. Since many women believe they will never know fulfilling love, they are willing to settle for strategies that help ease the pain and increase the peace, pleasure, and playfulness in existing relationships, particularly romantic ones. No vehicle in our culture exists for readers to talk back to the writers of this literature. Facts. Well, yeah, it does. Twitter. And we do not really know if it has been truly useful, if it promotes constructive change. The fact that women more than men buy self-help books using our consumer dollars to keep specific books on bestseller lists is no indication that these books actually help us transform our lives. I have bought tons of self-help books. Only a very few have really made a difference in my life. This is true for many readers. The lack of ongoing public discussion and public policy about the practice of love in our culture and our lives means that we still look to books as primary source of guidance and direction. Large numbers of readers embrace Peck's definition of love and are applying it to their lives in ways. Large numbers of readers embrace Peck's definition of love and are applying it to their lives in ways that are helpful and transformative. We can spread the word by evoking the definition in day-to-day conversations, not just when we talk to other adults, but in our conversations with children and teenagers. When we intervene on mystifying assumptions that love cannot be defined by offering workable, useful definitions, we are already creating a context where love can begin to flourish. Some folks have difficulty with Peck's definition of love because he uses the word spiritual. Hold on, I need some of this tea. He is referring to that dimension of our core reality where mind, body, and spirit are one. Some folks have difficulty with Peck's definition of love because he uses the word spiritual. He is referring to that dimension of our core reality where mind, body, and spirit are one. An individual does not need to be a believer in a religion to embrace the idea that there is an animating principle in the self, a life force. Some of us call it soul. Excuse me. An individual does not need to be a believer in a religion to embrace the idea that there is an animating principle in the self, a life force. Some of us call it a soul, that when nurtured enhances our capacity to be more fully self-actualized and able to engage in communion with the world around us. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught we have no control over our feelings. Yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences. To think of actions shaping feelings is one way we rid ourselves of conventionally accepted assumptions such as that parents love their children or that one simply falls in love without exercising will or choice. That there are such things as crimes of passion, i.e., he killed her because he loved her so much. If we were constantly remembering that love is as love does, we would not use the word in a manner that devalues and degrades its meaning. When we are loving, we openly and honestly express care, affection, responsibility, respect, commitment, and trust. Definitions are vital starting points for the imagination. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. I got chills reading that. Manifestation, we all know. And if you don't know, now you know. What you put out into the universe, what you think, is what you are. I think, therefore I am. A good definition marks our starting point and lets us know where we want to end up. As we move toward our desired destination, we chart the journey, creating a map. We need a map to guide us on our journey to love, starting with the place where we know what we mean when we speak of love. Starting with the place where we know what we mean when we speak of love. Chapter 1, all about love. Give love words, clarity. Thank you all for tuning in to today's chapter of Maad Reads. I love you all. Lead with love. Love in action. Because love is as love does. Peace.